And welcome. My name's Taryn and I'm part of the programs team here at Hornsby Library. I would like to recognise the traditional owners of the lands of Hornsby Shire, the Darug and Guringai people, and I pay my respect to their ancestors and elders, past and present. I acknowledge and uphold their intrinsic connections and continuing relationships to country. Our guest this evening is Hugh Mackay. Hugh is a social psychologist and researcher, the author of 22 books, a fellow of the Australian Psychological Society and an honorary professor in the Research School of Psychology at the Australian National University. He also happens to be one of our all-time favourite guests and is joining us for the fourth time tonight. Hornsby Shire Library Service celebrates his 50th anniversary tomorrow, so we're thrilled that Hugh can be here at this time. Hugh's latest book is The Kindness Revolution, a truly remarkable book that shows how crises and catastrophes often turn out to be the making of us. In all of his books, Hugh has consistently reminded us how important our connection with community is, and The Kindness Revolution is a timely reminder of why radical kindness is the key to healing. We will have time for questions at the end of the talk. If you're joining us from home, please type your questions into the Q&A box on your screen. Welcome, Hugh, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much indeed for that warm welcome, Taryn, and happy 50th anniversary to Hornsby Library. What a magnificent achievement. I've always greatly enjoyed my visits to the library, and I'm sorry that this one has to be done virtually. Isn't it funny how the meaning of that word has changed? I'd like to begin my presentation tonight by saying something that's so blindingly self-evident. You might wonder why I'm even bothering to mention it, but I just want to remind us all that we humans are members of a social species. There are lots of social species on the planet Earth, but we're one of them. And what that means is that as members of a social species, we are hopeless in isolation. We need each other. We need families, we need neighbourhoods, we need colleagues, we need groups, communities of all kinds to sustain us and nurture us and to give us that all-important sense of belonging, which is so fundamental to the mental and emotional health of someone who belongs to a social species. Our species could not survive, let alone thrive, without social harmony. And the good news coming to us from neuroscientists, that extraordinary breed of scientists who are able to peep into the human brain in ways that psychologists and philosophers could previously only speculate about, neuroscientists tell us they can actually they can identify the cooperative center in the human brain. In other words, no surprise, considering we are a cooperative species, we are hardwired for cooperation. It's innate that we should be equipped to form the groups and communities that we depend on for our emotional and physical health. And so it's not much of a leap from that to say that kindness is one of our innate capacities, because kindness is, after all, the essential ingredient in cooperation. Kindness is the essential ingredient in social harmony. How else are we going to get along with each other? How else are we going to engage in this project of creating harmonious and sustainable groups and communities, except by treating each other with kindness and compassion and respect? Now, we use the word kindness a lot. I suppose we all think we know what kindness means. Perhaps we don't even need to define the word, but I do want to just say a couple of things about how I interpret that word kindness, the meanings that I give to that word. And this relates to the fundamental proposition that I've mentioned, which is that we are members of the social species. Because of that, because of our deep yearning to belong, the deepest psychological need that we humans have is to be accepted, to be acknowledged, to be understood, to be appreciated, to be included. I suppose the big way of saying that is our deep need is to be taken seriously, to be acknowledged as part of this species that we belong to. So I would define kindness as anything we do to show another person that we take them seriously. Anything we do to show another person that we acknowledge them, appreciate them, include them, and so on. And that, of course, can be anything from a simple smile or a wave as you pass someone in the street, someone you know or someone you don't know. It can be offering to share a sandwich with someone or buy a cup of coffee for them or help a frail elderly person on or off a bus or help someone with their shopping if we're in the middle of a pandemic lockdown or whatever it might be. Any sign that I've noticed you, that I'm not ignoring you, that I'm including and appreciating you is an act of kindness. And every act of kindness is therapeutic. In some ways, the kindest thing we can ever do to each other is the very thing that you're doing right now, and I appreciate it, and that is listen to each other. Listening is perhaps one of the most therapeutic gifts we can offer each other, because when you listen to someone without having to put it into words, what you're saying to them is, I take you seriously enough to bother listening to what you have to say. I'm acknowledging that you want to tell me something. And so my attentive and empathic listening sends this big, big message that I take you seriously. But notice the converse. If I don't listen to you properly, if I'm looking at my watch or looking around the room hoping to catch sight of someone more interesting to talk to, or in some other way I convey that I'm not really attentively listening to you, then again, the unspoken message is very clear, isn't it? The unspoken message is, I'm sorry, I don't take you seriously enough to bother listening to you. Now, would you ever say that to a partner or a colleague or a child or a friend or a neighbour? Of course you wouldn't, because it would be so hurtful and so offensive. And yet, when we withhold the gift of listening, or whether in other ways we ignore people, that's the message that we're sending. So kindness is like a universal therapy that we're able to offer each other. In fact, I think of kindness as probably the most precious asset, or the capacity for kindness as the most precious asset that our species possesses. We don't always value it as much as we should, do we? I mean, there's a lot of tension between our capacity for kindness and the siren song of the ego. We're often distracted from the need to be kind, the need to respond to other people, the need to take interest in other people from our ego-driven agenda, our competitiveness or our acquisitiveness or other things where we just want to please ourselves. And we momentarily forget that when we're being truly human, when we're expressing the essence of human nature, we will be kind to everyone. That will be our way of being in the world. It's not heroic. It's not remarkable. It's just being true to what Abraham Lincoln very poetically described as the better angels of our nature. It's not newsworthy when someone helps an elderly person across the road. It's not newsworthy when someone's shopping bag bursts in the middle of a rainstorm and someone else goes to their assistance. What's newsworthy is when we don't do those things, because that's so natural for humans. But it is remarkable, isn't it? It is wonderful that we belong to a species that's capable of showing kindness towards people we don't know, towards people we don't like, towards people we could never agree with about religion or politics or culture or anything else. I mean, if someone is in need, like that person whose shopping bag burst, you don't go to them and say, look, I can see you're in a spot of bother here, and I'd like to help out, but look, tell me how you voted in the last election. Or tell me if you believe that Jesus rose bodily from the dead. You don't qualify people in order to show kindness towards them. It's simply the natural response to another person, not even an explicit need in another person, just the existence of another person who's come into your orbit. I think of kindness as a unique form of human love. In fact, I really like that old-fashioned word loving kindness, which captures this idea very beautifully. But all forms of human love are wonderful. Of course, romantic love is exciting and energizing, and familial love is remarkable. The bonds of family relationships are very strong, in many cases unbreakable. And companionate love is wonderful. Where would we be without the love of our friends? Well, that's all terrific. But those forms of love all involve our emotions. Now, here's this very distinctive, wonderful form of human love which doesn't actually involve our emotions at all. It's not about, kindness is not about affection. Kindness is not about feeling something for that person. Kindness is simply about acknowledging that person. Samuel Johnson, 250 years ago, Samuel Johnson wrote something which I think is very beautiful, very powerful, which we should probably all write down and stick on our desks or our fridge or somewhere. He said, kindness is in our power, even when fondness is not. And that's a thing, it's true. It is true. It is lovely that we belong to a species where we can show kindness to anyone, whether we like them, disagree with them, etc., or not. It makes me proud to be a human when I realise that that's our capacity. It's like as I've said, it's like showing emotionless love towards anyone. It's like breathing. It's a way of being in the world. Well, now that's a quick overview of what it means to be human from this particular point of view. But now I want you to pause for a moment with all that in mind, with that as sort of background, and just think about what's been happening to our society over the last 30 or 40 years. It's been a tumultuous time, hasn't it? A period of extraordinary social and cultural and political and economic and technological change. Our lives have been disrupted and disrupted and disrupted by all of these changes. And when you look at the cumulative effect of these changes, and I'll just quickly run through a few examples in a moment, but when you look at the cumulative effect of these changes, what you're looking at is pressures on us which have been reshaping our society in ways that take us away from our essential human nature as social beings who need each other, who need connections, who need functioning, harmonious communities, and for whom kindness is sort of the currency of everyday life. The changes that have been reshaping us have pushed us in the opposite direction, towards more emphasis on ourselves as unique individuals. The effect has been to increase social fragmentation, what sociologists refer to as atomization, where we have a sense of ourselves more as isolated individuals than as members of cohesive social communities. More social fragmentation and erosion of social cohesion. Now, it's not complete, of course. It's not some process that's over, but we're moving in that direction. And I think it's helpful sometimes just to stop and recognize that these trends are happening and what the effect of them is on our humanity. So let me just quickly run through a few examples of the trends that I'm referring to, and you'll see why I'm suggesting what I'm suggesting. I don't have to explain these in great depth because we're all familiar with them. We're all living through them. In fact, these are not things that have happened to us as though someone has decreed, thou shalt become more socially fragmented and this is how we're going to do it. These are trends that we've all contributed to by choosing to live in different ways without usually recognizing what the social impact of those differences might be. So very quickly, let me run through just 5 or 6 of the main trends. First of all, definitely top of my list is our shrinking households. In Australia, households have been shrinking steadily for the last 100 years. In the last 100 years, our population has increased 5-fold. the number of households has increased tenfold. So we're growing our households at twice the rate we're growing the population. Conclusion, households are getting smaller. They certainly are. The average Australian household now contains just 2.5 people. In fact, about 52 or 53% of all Australian households contain just one or two people. And in fact, if you categorise households as single person, two person, three person, etc., then the biggest single category is now the single person household. And it's also the fastest growing category. At the moment, every fourth household, in round figures, every fourth household contains just one person. And the Bureau of Statistics is predicting within the next 10 to 15 years, if present trends continue, it'll be every third household that contains just one person. That's a very different kind of society from the one any of us grew up in as children. Now, that does not mean, of course, that everyone who lives alone, and I'm sure many of you do live alone or have lived alone, most of us have had periods of living alone, but I'm sure if you do live alone, that doesn't necessarily mean you're lonely. It doesn't mean that you've experienced a loss of social cohesion or connection. But what it does mean, of course, is that the risk of social isolation is greatly increased for people who live alone. Now, many people live alone because they've chosen to, because they love it. They say, I've got a family, I can visit, I've got friends, I've got colleagues at work. My life is full of social connections. I love coming home at night, shut the door, punch the air, and say, alone at last, peace and quiet. This is a great symbol of my freedom and my independence. And there are lots of people who feel like that. And there are lots of people who don't. There are lots of people who are not voluntary solo householders, but whose circumstances, such as bereavement or divorce or relocation, have pitchforked them into living alone, and they don't enjoy it, and they yearn to have companionship all the time. And they're the people who, for example, might say, when I go out at night, I turn the lights on, or I even turn the television on, so that when I come home, I won't feel as though I'm coming home to an empty house. So there's every kind of situation involved in this explosion in solo householder status, but let's just recognize that it's a contributing factor to the increased risk of social fragmentation. By the way, just as a little note, passing by this point, those of us who do not live alone, those of us who are not at risk of social isolation, bear some responsibility to keep an eye out for the people in our street or in our apartment block who are living alone and may be at risk of social isolation. We need to be alert to them, ready to reach out to them. Well, very quickly, let me just run through a couple of other trends. I won't spend so much time on them, but a second one would be our rate of relationship breakdown. Between 35 and 40% of contemporary marriages are ending in divorce, and the rate of breakdown is somewhat higher than that for unmarried couples. Now, again, there are people who want to divorce. I mean, this is not a trend that we're going to want to reverse or even slow down. It seems as though it's going to keep on exactly as it is. But of course, it is hugely disruptive. It means if it's just two people in the household, a two-person household becomes two single-person households, at least for a while. It's disruptive for families and extended families and friendship circles and neighbourhoods when these relationship breakdowns occur. And of course, it's disruptive for kids if they're involved, and they often are involved, which is why in Australia at the moment, 1 million dependent kids, in round figures, 1 million dependent kids live with just one of their natural parents. And half of them, 500,000 kids, are engaged in a weekly or fortnightly mass migration to the home of the non-custodial parent for an access visit. Hugely disruptive, contributing to some loss of social cohesion. while I'm mentioning kids, I think I would actually put the fall in birth rate on this list of social trends that are reshaping us. Our birth rate has fallen again in the last 12 months. We're down to 1.6 babies per woman, still way ahead of many of the countries of Western Europe that have birth rates around 1.3 or 1.4. The replacement rate, of course, is 2.1. So we're way below the replacement. And relative to total population, in Australia, we are currently producing the smallest generation of children Australia has ever produced. Now, why do I mention that? Well, any of you who are parents know if you move into a new neighbourhood, it's usually the kids who get to know other kids first. Social connections often start with the children on the school bus or in the playground or somewhere, and gradually the families get to know each other and social networks develop. Kids act as a sort of social lubricant in most communities. So when, as at present, we are producing the smallest generation, not in absolute numbers, but relative to total population, the smallest generation ever of children, that social lubricant is in shorter supply. And we do have to compensate, of course, and we know how people are compensating. It's often through pet ownership. There are more pets than people in Australia now. I think there are 28 million pets and 24.5 million humans. And we know from the names people give their dogs in particular that they're often child substitutes. Someone recently thought I'd be pleased to know that they'd called their dog Hugh. So I don't think there's much doubt about what many of those dogs are being used for. Quickly through a couple of other trends. Our increased mobility, just like Americans, now Australians are moving house on average once every 6 years. If you've lived in the same house for the last 30 years, imagine how often some other people are moving in order to get the national average up to once every 6 years. And of course, we're more mobile in the sense that we have almost universal car ownership. Most of us live in drive-in, drive-out suburbs. You wave at your neighbour's car. You assume your neighbour's driving, but that's not quite the same as stopping and saying good day on the footpath. Busyness, I would put on this list of social trends, eroding social cohesion. Busyness is the great enemy of social cohesion. Oh, the neighbours are having drinks on Friday night. Oh, no, I'm too busy. Don't disturb mummy, she's too busy. We seem at the moment to be wearing our busyness rather as a badge of pride. In Australia, it's even changed the way we greet each other. Have you noticed that? People now tend to say, how are you going, Darren? Busy? As though, come on, are you busy or are you dead? The switch has got to be on or off. Well, be aware, be cautious about this trap. People who retire say, I'm so busy, I don't know how I ever found time to go to work. Well, ask yourself why that is, and might it be interfering with your openness to other people, your ability to stop and have a chat to a neighbour or someone in the street who looks a bit bewildered and so on. The last thing I'd put on this list, although I'm sure you could think of many other things we could add, but the information technology revolution, of course, has contributed to social fragmentation, even though it's a wonderful revolution. We wouldn't be doing this tonight if it were not for this brilliant technology that allows us to be connected, or at least to feel connected. We're all connected to a screen. I feel as if I'm looking at Taryn right in the eye, but of course I'm not. I'm looking at a screen. And if I did look right in the eye, Taryn, it would look as if I wasn't, because I'd be looking at the camera. But it is brilliant, isn't it? I mean, we live at a time when there's a lockdown, we can still make contact with people via Zoom and FaceTime and all of that. Fantastic. But it's a paradox. On the one hand, this revolution promised to make us more connected than ever before, and it has. And at the same time, it's made it easier than ever before for us to stay apart, just like we can do tonight. And we can have this event together while staying apart. Now, on the surface, maybe that doesn't matter. But of course, another thing that neuroscientists tell us is that we humans absolutely need social contact. And that doesn't mean via technology. That means face-to-face contact, and in particular, eye contact. The magic of human interaction is not just all the subtlety, all the complexity of posture, gestures, facial expression, tone of voice, rate of speech, all those things that we encounter when we have a face-to-face conversation, but also eye contact. If you're trying to talk to somebody and they don't make eye contact with you, it's very unnerving, isn't it? You feel as though you're not getting through. Well, neuroscientists say it's a bit like hunger for food. Our social hunger is not really satisfied each day unless we have some eye contact with other human beings. Now, this is why a phenomenon has now emerged globally, but certainly in Australian society, which many psychologists and other commentators are describing as the phenomenon of being connected but lonely. Swinburne University did a study before the pandemic in association with the Australian Psychological Society, in which they discovered a study of loneliness, in which they discovered that 25%, get this is a chilling statistic, 25% of Australian adults report feeling lonely for most of every week. And the loneliest segment of our community are the 18 to 24-year-olds, who also happen to be the heaviest users of social media. So we've got this strange phenomenon of people who are connected but lonely because their connections are not face-to-face, three-dimensional eye contact. So let me pause again, quickly reflect on this. The cumulative effect of all of those social changes, I said, really is to drive the process, which is a Western phenomenon, but Australia's right in the thick of it, the process of increasing social fragmentation, the rise of a kind of rampant individualism, the me culture, an obsession with identity, gender identity, ethnic identity, religious identity, identity politics, all of that. Now, there's nothing wrong with having a strong sense of identity. It's fundamental to our sense of ourselves. But when we put identity ahead of humanity, we're in trouble. When we think that the most important thing about me is how I'm different from you, how I'm unique and special, then we're in trouble. Because in fact, the most significant, the most important thing by far, not always the most fascinating, but the most significant thing about me is that I am part of you, that we all share this common humanity. So when we go through a period like the period I've just been describing, pretty obviously society is going to suffer. It's not surprising, is it, that even before the pandemic, in our society, we were suffering from those triple epidemics, the epidemic of loneliness, the epidemic of anxiety, and the epidemic of depression. In our criminal justice system, the worst punishment we can think of is solitary confinement. Well, that is the worst punishment for someone who belongs to a social species. So I've talked about the essence of what it means to be human, our need for connection and kindness as the way we do that. I've talked about the big social changes that have been reshaping us and pushing us in the direction of becoming more individualistic and losing some of our sense of connectedness. So now, in this sort of final section of my presentation, and I look forward to discussing all this with you in a few minutes. But now I want to talk about our most recent history. I want to talk about what's been happening to us since 2020, when we had those catastrophic bushfires, immediately followed by the arrival of COVID in our midst, and the pandemic, of course, has continued now for 2 years, and we've since had, in many parts of the country, catastrophic floods, worst ever, etc. Now, what has that done to us? How does that relate to the sort of trends I've been describing? Crises, catastrophes, upheavals, disruptions like this, at first often induce feelings of fear and panic. And we heard all about panic buying at the beginning of the pandemic, supermarket aisles crowded with people desperate to stock up. Yes, that's what often happens at the beginning of a crisis, but what usually happens very quickly as we move into a catastrophic situation is that our true nature takes over. We remember what it means to be human. We become kinder. We become more cooperative. We acknowledge that we need to make personal sacrifices for the common good. We become a bit more attuned to the needs of people in our immediate neighbourhood. And whether it's a pandemic or a depression or a war, history teaches us that over and over again, the shock of a crisis, a catastrophe, almost always, not universally, of course, there are always exceptions, but generally speaking, overwhelmingly, the impact is to jolt us into remembering what a human person is, into remembering that kindness is the currency of a harmonious society, to remind us of our responsibility to the community. So the big question, of course, in 2022, it's a fascinating question for social psychologists, but isn't it a fascinating question for all of us, is has COVID been enough of a shock? Has the experience of the lockdowns, the social distancing, the mask wearing, all of these things, has this been enough of a shock to mitigate the effects of those trends that I was talking about a moment ago in chapter 2, not chapter 2 of the book, chapter 2 of my presentation, and mitigate the effects of those trends that have been pushing us away from our sense of being communitarians? Well, we don't know yet, but there are some encouraging signs, aren't there? When you think about the lessons that we've learned as a result of living through the pandemic and the lockdowns in particular, what have we learned? So surely we have learned the importance of the neighbourhood, the importance of looking out for neighbours who might be in need of our help. We've all had a taste of social isolation. We don't like it. We might like to work from home a bit and go to the office a bit. But generally speaking, we don't like social isolation when we get a taste of it. And that might just remind us that there are many people in our midst for whom social isolation is a daily challenge. And are we going to become a little more compassionate, a little more caring towards those people? We've learned that we can lead a less busy, less stressed life. Maybe we can adapt. Maybe we don't have to go back. And people say, let's get back to normal. Well, do we want to get back to a normal in which we were too stressed, increasingly fragmented, etc.? Perhaps not. Perhaps the pandemic has taught us that there's a middle way. We've certainly learned this important lesson about cooperation and that we do need to make sacrifices for the common good. And of course, we've also learned through our reliance on information technology that, as I said earlier on, it's brilliant, but it's no substitute for the real thing. So how seriously are we going to take these lessons? Are we going to turn the crisis into a revolution? That's the hope that I had when I wrote this new book, The Kindness Revolution, that Taryn referred to, sorry. And that's really the question that's at the heart of that book. Can we take the crisis and turn it into a revolution? Not just in our personal lives, although that's crucial, but what happens if our national agenda, it's a good question to ask in the middle of an election campaign, isn't it? What happens if our national agenda is going to be influenced by the lessons we've learned as a result of the pandemic? How about if we became known as a kind country? How about that? If we became known as a loving country in the sense of loving kindness, rather than just a lucky country. But if kindness became a big agenda item in politics and national leadership in general, look how different things could be. Wouldn't we be making a much more energetic commitment to reconciliation with the peoples of our First Nations? Wouldn't we be making a far more humane response to people who come here legitimately seeking asylum? Wouldn't we be making a more determined effort to eradicate poverty and homelessness? Wouldn't we be taking much more urgent action in the interests of future generations to mitigate the effects of climate change? Wouldn't a more loving society be far more generous towards people for whom we can find no work. And we know that at the moment, roughly 10% of the workforce either have no work or not nearly enough work to get by. Unemployment plus underemployment is a bit over 10%. We'd be far kinder, wouldn't we, to people struggling with mental illness, disabilities, other debilitating conditions. We'd take far better care of our frail age. Weren't you shocked by the results of the Aged Care Royal Commission? That pointed to unkindness in our society, including some of our public policy. A more loving society, a kinder society would tackle the growing problem of educational inequality with a bit more imagination. We would certainly insist on greater civility in the way we conduct our politics and industrial relations. Well, let me wrap this up so we can have some conversation about this by simply asking you whether you ever dream of a better society. On some quiet Sunday afternoon, do you ever find yourself wondering, especially in the middle of an election campaign, wondering if our society could do better? And when you think of a better society, I'm quite sure you don't think, I wish there was a bit more violence. I wish people weren't so nice to each other. Why do we waste so many words disagreeing? Why don't we just hit each other? Of course, that's ridiculous, isn't it? We don't dream like that. When you dream of a better society, I think it's an almost universal dream. We dream of a kinder society. We dream of a more compassionate, more cooperative, more respectful, more inclusive, a more egalitarian, more harmonious, less cynical kind of society. Isn't that right? Less violent. Well, if that's the sort of society that you believe in, then there is only one way to convert it into that kind of, if that's your dream, there's only one way to make the dream come true, and that is that it's not going to happen because some government passes a kindness law or someone waves a magic wand. It will only happen if each of us who share that dream start living as if that's the kind of society we actually do live in. If enough of us live that way, then change will come. We will create the kind of society we dream of by starting to live that way. Thank you, Tara.
Thank you so much, Hugh. Like, so many wonderful points to think about for all of us, I think. So because we've got an audience here at the library, and we've also got an audience at home, we'll just get questions from everyone. So I'll start with an online person. But if I could just say to the people that are here, everyone's been given a little card if you wanted to write a question on there, or just feel free to pop your hand in the air. But I'll just start with someone who's joining us online. So Hugh, she's asked, do you see any solution for the person who lives alone and is lonely?
Yes, there is a very definite solution to that. If we know who they are, we go and knock on their door. If there's someone in your street, someone in your neighbourhood who you know is living alone, you don't see them much, they seem to be isolated, it's not their fault. It's the fault of those of us who live in that environment and have failed to understand that we're all in this thing together. I mean, that was the sort of slogan, wasn't it, during the pandemic? We're all in this thing together. Well, we're all in it together whether there's a pandemic or not. I think we do really need to stop and think about this problem of an epidemic of loneliness. Every fourth person, that means probably in a day, every fourth person that you see is experiencing loneliness. They are our responsibility. And of course, it's a responsibility to some extent of people who are experiencing loneliness to reach out as well. But often when people become lonely, they become inward in their focus. We know from research both here and in America that loneliness is associated not only with increased anxiety and the increased risk of depression, but there are physical ailments that go along with loneliness as well, like hypertension, inflammation, disturbed sleep, greater vulnerability to addictions and so on. So once a person is trapped in the spiral of loneliness, it's very hard for them to break out of it, but very easy for us to help relieve their pain, not by saying, hey, are you lonely? But just knocking on the door and saying, look, I've got a couple of the neighbours coming over on Friday afternoon, we're just going to have a cup of tea or a drink or something, why don't you join us? Or here's a book I've been reading, I thought you might enjoy this, or here are some lemons off my tree. I've never really introduced myself before, but I'm Hugh, I just live over there. If you ever need anything, give us a call. But in the meantime, why don't you come over on the weekend? We're having a barbecue, just come and meet some of the neighbours. It's so easy to think of ways of, and we need things like Neighbourhood Day that happened just a couple of weeks ago, to galvanise us, to remember that part of our responsibility as human beings, part of our number one responsibility as citizens is to create harmonious, cohesive neighbourhoods in which everyone will feel safe and included and as if they belong. Now, this doesn't mean we all have to be best friends with our neighbours. It doesn't mean that these people are necessarily going to share our politics. There might be things about them we don't like. That's not a barrier to our capacity to show kindness, recognising only, you don't have to recognise anything else except this is a human being. This human being lives in my street. I have a responsibility because I am a human too, because I'm a citizen, because I'm part of this neighbourhood. It's just a bit of a shift in the way we think about it, and it changes everything.
Absolutely, thanks, Hugh. Does anyone in the audience here have a question? Actually, would you like to come over and pass that question on to Hugh? I don't want to get it wrong. Sorry, Hugh. This lovely lady has a question. If you wanted to come over. That's okay. If you just want to speak to Hugh, you can see him there on the screen.
Actually, Hugh, I read with you in Wahroonga a few years ago, but do you think that the institution of compulsory education in its current form is quite as social as it should be, or is it actually fragmenting our society by unwittingly introducing competition and judgment, and also chopping our society up so that children are only with their own age group, and parents have to, when they come home with homework. I think the lockdown that we have had was maybe not ideal for children, but I don't think school in its current form is either, and maybe we could find a middle way.
Well, thank you for that. That's a lot. And strangely enough, I do in the book I do have quite a bit to say about our current approach to learning and education. I'm by no means opposed. In fact, I'm 100% in favour of compulsory mass education. I think it's been a huge factor in the development of contemporary societies. But I agree with you that we're getting a lot of it wrong. We are introducing a competitive element, which is often very dispiriting, disadvantages a lot of kids. We raise them on the idea of winners and losers. People from Albert Einstein to Carl Rogers, my psychological hero, have had a lot to say about current methods of classroom teaching, which I can't remember the Einstein quote. It's in the book, can't remember it exactly, but it's something like, this is the way we go about teaching our children is almost guaranteed to stifle the holy plant of curiosity. And I think there's a lot in that. A lot of it is too structured, a lot of it is discourages a sort of free-form interaction. In societies where we seem to be doing better with education, such as Finland, a far less competitive system. They start later, of course. The kids don't go to school till they're 7. They have preschool and other things, but the actual formal instruction doesn't start until age 7. I think there's a lot to be said for that. So yeah, I think let's have a revolt. Let's talk about how we could handle it differently. For a start, we should double the wages of school teachers. That would help. Professionalise it a bit more. Reward people for doing a very tough job. But also, I think parents have a role in this too. I mean, parents very often, and grandparents perhaps even more, guilty of this, we say, so what did you learn today? I don't know if we ever say, who were you kind to today? Or what was the kindest thing you saw today? But on the other side of this argument, I should say there are schools where this is now happening. There are schools which are placing great emphasis on social interactions, on the need for more kindness, on the need to learn about how to build a community and to get along with people that you don't like, aren't your natural friends and so on. I think that is starting to happen. One of the things, it's a controversial point, but one of the things that I think has really Australia has been sliding down the list of OECD countries in terms of our literacy and numeracy levels. And one of the reasons for that, of course, is at the top, we have brilliant schools that are world class, but we have more and more schools struggling at the bottom through being underfunded. Why is that? There are many reasons, but one of them, I realise this is a controversial point, and my own background was in the private school system, but it's gone mad. We are now a society in which $18 billion of public money every year goes into non-public schools. Now, I'm not against non-public schools. Anyone can start a school as long as they meet the requirements. Anyone who wants to educate their children within the framework of a particular religious faith or cultural tradition or whatever it might be, fine. But to take public money to do a private thing seems to have got us into terrible trouble, and we've created this monster now in which we've thought of choice and competition in the education market as being crucial, rather than thinking of the money that's available to go into. We used to have a world-class public education system. It all changed in the 60s, but we used to have a world-class public education system because that's the only place that public money went. So I think that would help a lot. I think what this question is about is partly to do with this extraordinary competitive element that's entered the education market, if we can use that word, and the losers have been public schools in poorer socioeconomic areas.
Thank
Can I say
you.
something, Wendy?
Yep,
Do you
sure.
think the competition,
Yep, that's okay.
do you think the competition also occurs because of the ratio of children to adults?
Do you
It's
think
not a society at all.
do you think the competition also occurs because of the ratio of children to adults?
One adult to 25 children. It's
Oh,
not-
the teacher to student
Yes.
ratio.
Ah,
Do you
yes.
think that that's increased the competition as well?
Well, yeah, I mean, if we were going to wave a magic wand, there are hundreds of things we'd change, aren't there, about our schools? We'd have class sizes of 8. That would be fantastic. But I went to school at Roseville Public School in a class of 40. So, the idea of 24 kids in a class was just a dream back then. We all survived, but there's no doubt if we were getting a perfect system or something closer to perfection, there would certainly be a much different ratio of staff to students.
And parents involved.
And getting parents involved as well was the comment.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So the next question is, the essence of kindness, as you so well put it, is that it is given freely. Most of us are either consciously or subconsciously are transactional in our thinking and actions. What do you think we can do differently to shift this?
Yeah, gee, that's another wonderful question, isn't it? And that word transactional, that's like a big red flag. And so often we do think even of kindness in transactional terms, as though, well, if I'm kind to other people, they'll be kind to me. Sorry, that's not the deal. The deal is I'm human, I will be kind. Will other people be kind to me? Some will, some won't. The other transactional dimension that's often brought into this is people saying, well, when you're kind to people, it makes you feel better. It's really good for you. to be kind to people. Well, I have to say I hate that as a proposition. It might be true. I mean, there's some evidence that that is the case, but it's not universally true. I mentioned the case of the person whose shopping bag burst in the middle of a rainstorm. You go and help them, you're going to get wet, you're going to be late for a meeting, you're going to feel cranky, and you might even, because you're human, you might even feel a bit resentful of the time and effort and inconvenience involved. You're not going to feel better. Now, you have helped to make the world a better place, and when you go to bed that night, you might think, oh, well, that was a real nuisance, but I know I did the right thing. But that's not what it's about. We're not being kind to people so they'll be kind to us. We're not being kind to people so we will feel better about ourselves. We're being kind to people because that's what humans do. And if other people let us down, that's irrelevant. And if we perform an act of kindness, go out of our way to help somebody and they seem ungrateful, or we don't get a charge of self-esteem or something else, so what? Kindness, we don't stop breathing, we don't stop being kind if we've discovered the truth that if enough of us just act kindly, we will transform our society.
So Hugh, with an election coming up, how do we look for leaders with empathy? Are there any leaders who you think model kindness and empathy well?
Yeah, I do. New Zealand's Prime Minister.
Yes.
And there are some Scandinavian leaders, Finland and I think Denmark too, two female prime ministers. Maybe that's more than a coincidence. We could say Nelson Mandela was an example of a national leader, an inspirational figure from the 20th century. On our own political stage at the moment, there is so much pressure in the way we manage our two-party system, make it competitive, make it ruthless, attacks on individuals, journalists who are trying to catch politicians out, all this sort of stuff is so antithetical to kindness that it's hardly surprising that we hear all these gruesome stories about what the culture of Parliament House is like. If you're going to run a system like that, which is inherently adversarial, you are going to stifle the human capacity for kindness. So this time, I mean, my personal hope, for what it's worth, is that this time there will be a huge swathe of very smart independents who get elected and who completely disrupt the system and cause chaos for 3 years, but force kind of short circuit this mad adversarial system and force whoever forms, let's say, a minority government to negotiate, to collaborate, to compromise, to consult. That's what a democratic parliament should be all about, and we've allowed ours to degenerate. You can't blame any individual, but it's time for us to rethink the system, no doubt.
So I promise this isn't a leading question, but you did mention some female leaders who display empathetic qualities. Do you think there is a particular group in society that has more capacity for kindness?
No, I mean, of course, the cliche, the stereotype, if we were having this conversation 50 years ago, we would have said, oh, yes, women are far more empathic than men. Well, we know that's not true. There are plenty of non-empathic women and there are plenty of highly empathic men, and cultural conditioning has a lot to do with that. And we've come a long way, courtesy of initially the women's movement, then the gender revolution, a third wave feminism and so on. We've come a long way in understanding that humans have the capacity for tenderness, kindness, gentleness, sensitivity, the capacity to be good listeners, all of that. That's a human quality. Culturally, we have encouraged it. Traditionally, we've encouraged it more in females than males, but that's changing. And thank heavens it is changing, because this is not the province of one gender or the other, or one personality type or the other. This is something we need to nurture in our children and in ourselves. I mean, I think, I realise we're running out of time, Taryn, but just add one little thought there. I think it's a very good discipline for us to adopt as a daily practice, really, perhaps at the end of every day, maybe at bedtime, to set aside a few moments to say, whether you're a man or woman, young, old, whatever you are, doesn't matter, just to say, was I kind enough today? How did I manage my various conversations, my various encounters? Did I do it kindly? Because it's possible to do everything. You can terminate a relationship kindly. You can discipline an employee kindly. You can discipline a child kindly. I don't mean being soft in the head. I don't mean being all soppy and I mean, you can be tough and kind. We can have a conversation in which we disagree entirely. We can still be kind to each other even while we're disagreeing. So I think daily reflection on how kind, when it comes to the end, when we have our final daily reflection on the proverbial deathbed, we can guarantee no one is ever going to say, I wish I'd run faster, I wish I'd worked harder, I wish I'd accumulated more cash, I wish I had a bigger car. No. What the literature of death and dying says is that people are typically at the end, when they reflect on their lives, if they know the end is coming, is, was I kind enough? Was I a sufficiently loving partner? Was I kind enough to my neighbours, to my children, etc.? So let's not wait till we're nearly dead. Let's make it a daily practice that we reflect on this today in order to encourage all of us to be kinder tomorrow.
Thank you, Hugh. And I would just like to ask you the final question today, unless anyone in the audience has, oh, sorry, we've just got a couple more questions.
Just a quick one.
Very quick one.
Lots of organisations are planning, do we return to work or people stay at home?
Yeah.
What's the best answer in 10 years' time? What's the best answer that you can say back in 2022? We decided this. What's the best answer?
So there's a gentleman in the audience wanting to know what the best answer is to the question of, do we go to work or do we stay home? When we look back and reflect on this time, what do you think everyone will kind of wish?
Yeah, I think the almost universal response will be, can we have a hybrid model? Can we spend maybe a couple of days a week at home? Because we've proved, I mean, wasn't it interesting that national productivity rose during the national lockdown in 2020? Surprise, surprise, you can trust people to work at home. Who would have thought? And a lot of people realised that they didn't have to have a daily commute. They could work from home and stay in their pyjamas all day if they wanted to and still get the work done. But we pretty soon realised that even the colleagues we don't like much are part of our little tribe, part of our herd. We need those incidental conversations that you have over a cup of coffee or in the washroom or somewhere that bonds us to each other and enriches the social setting for the work we do. So I think most of us are going to come to the conclusion that we'd like a bit of both, thank you. We don't want to work from home exclusively because that's too isolating, but we perhaps don't want to be slaves to the 9 to 5, 5 days a week being in that office. So I think employers have now learned that they can trust their employees to be a bit more flexible about this, and I suspect the hybrid model will really take off. This is not a good moment to be investing in corporate office space because a lot of companies are looking to downsize because they don't need to accommodate everyone all the time.
Absolutely. I think there was just one more question in the audience. Oh, this is your question. The question is, could you send a copy of your book to Vladimir Putin, please? I think he could probably do with a little bit of kindness.
Yes, if someone will translate it for us. We happily send a copy, yes. What a good idea.
And my question was just a very boring librarian question is, what are you reading at the moment, Hugh?
It's an interesting question because I'm working on a new novel, and when I'm writing fiction, I tend not to read fiction because it discourages me too much. But before I started work on this novel, I had a wonderful feast of reading fiction earlier in the year. I read Jonathan Franzen's latest, Crossroads, I read Amor Towles' new book, The Lincoln Highway, which I really enjoyed. The last novel I read before I pitched into work on my own was a book called Whereabouts by an American writer called, I'd never heard of her before, called Jumpa, Jhumpa, and her surname is something like Hariri. I haven't got that right. Anyway, the book is called Whereabouts, and it's very short, it's very evocative, and I strongly recommend it. So from now on, for the time being, it's going to be non-fiction for my reading while I work on this new novel.
Fantastic. And we can't wait for the new novel. We hope that we can get you back here in person in the library when it's done and you're ready to think about it.
Thank you.
I just want to thank you so much for being here tonight. And thank you everyone for joining us, those of you at home and those of you here in the library tonight. We have Joe from Novella Books for everyone who's here in the library if you'd like to purchase a copy of Hugh's book. And for anyone who's not in the library, you can pop into Novella Fine Books at Wahroonga and pick up a copy from Joe there. But again, thank you so much everyone for coming, and Hugh, thank you for joining us. It was an absolute pleasure.
Thanks very much, Tara.
Thank you so much.